200 o'clock. 3 o'clock. When time breaks, reality falls. Part 1. The Trap, Chapter 1. The Awakening, 12 p.m. The sound of shattering glass jolted Mara awake. She gasped, her chest heaving, fingers clutching at the sheets tangled around her legs. A faint memory lingered, a gunshot, a searing light, then nothing. Her apartment stood silent. Too silent. The clock on the wall glowed in eerie red digits. 2 o'clock p.m. Her head throbbed as if her brain had been dragged across time itself. She rubbed her temples, trying to piece together her last memory. Chronoguard HQ, an investigation into a breach. And then blankness. A soft hum vibrated through the air. Her gaze darted to the window. Outside, the world was bathed in a surreal amber glow, the sky split by jagged streaks of white light, like fractures in a mirror. The city streets below teemed with motionless cars, drivers frozen mid-turn. Time itself had stilled, yet Mara's heart raced. She reached for her chronoband, the device every Chronoguard operative relied on. It was gone. Her wrist was bare. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet moved as if drawn by an unseen force. She opened the door to find a man standing there, his face pale and gaunt, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Declan Kane," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't know me, but we've met before. You're trapped, just like me." 2:13 p.m. "What the hell do you mean, trapped?" Mara demanded, pacing the length of her apartment. Declan leaned against the wall, clutching his ribs like he'd been through a war. "It's a loop," he muttered. "We're caught in a 1-hour fragment. Every time the clock hits 3, it resets. We lose everything. Our progress, our memories, everything." Mara stopped pacing. "No, that's impossible. Chronoguard would have detected—" "They didn't," he interrupted. "Or maybe they did and left us here to rot. Either way, we're on our own." Her mind rebelled against his words. A time loop? No. The Pendulum, the rogue faction that thrived on chaos, was capable of many things, but not this. Not trapping a Chronoguard agent in her own timeline. Declan tossed her a small device. "Here. Found this on you the last loop. Thought you'd want it back." Her chronoband. She slid it onto her wrist, relief flooding her as the holographic interface lit up. But the screen flickered, glitching. Lines of corrupted code scrolled across the display. "Broken," Declan said. "Just like the rest of this godforsaken timeline." She ignored him, focusing on the fragments of data her chronoband managed to recover. Coordinates. A timestamp 2:45 p.m. A building marked in red, an office complex downtown. "What happens at 2:45? She asked, her voice tight. Declan's expression darkened. "Something catastrophic. A paradox event. I've tried to stop it. You've tried to stop it. We've failed. Over and over again." 2:45 p.m., Mara's pulse pounded as she and Declan sprinted through the chaotic streets. The city rippled with temporal instability. Cars flickered in and out of existence. Pedestrians froze mid-step, their forms blurring like a corrupted hologram. Ahead, the office complex loomed, its glass facade shimmering as though caught between two realities. A deep hum vibrated through the air, growing louder with every step. "Inside," Declan urged. "We don't have much time." Mara didn't need to be told twice. The building's front doors shattered as they approached, the shards hanging in midair before disintegrating into nothingness. Inside, the air was electric, crackling with energy. At the center of the lobby stood a glowing device, a sphere of fractured light, pulsating with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. "The Chronocore," Declan said. "The Pendulum's weapon. It's destabilizing the loop." Mara approached the sphere cautiously, her skin tingling as she got closer. Symbols she didn't recognize scrolled across its surface, their meaning just out of reach. She reached out to touch it. A deafening explosion ripped through the room. Mara was thrown backward, her body slamming into a pillar. Dazed, she looked up to see figures emerging from the shadows. The Pendulum. Their leader, Elliot Dre, stepped forward, his sharp features illuminated by the sphere's glow. "Agent Voss," he said, his tone almost mocking. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." 59 p.m. time fractured around them. The Chronocore pulsed erratically, each beat sending shockwaves through the building. The walls rippled like water, and the floor cracked beneath their feet. Mara aimed her weapon at Dre. "Shut it down, now." Dre smirked. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you. This loop is a test, a trial run. When we perfect it, we'll control time itself. You're tearing reality apart, Mara shouted, stepping closer. Reality was never stable to begin with, Dre replied calmly. We're simply giving humanity the power to reshape it. Behind her, Declan lunged at the chronocore, a makeshift EMP device in his hands. Dre moved faster than she thought possible, pulling a blade and driving it into Declan's side. No! Mara screamed, firing at Dre. The shot grazed his shoulder, sending him staggering back. Declan, blood pooling at his feet, slammed the EMP against the chronocore. The device erupted in a burst of light, blinding and all-consuming. 200 p.m. Mara woke with a start, her heart racing. The clock on the wall glowed 2 p.m. She screamed, slamming her fist against the table. The loop had reset. Again. But something was different. Her chronoband lit up, displaying a single line of uncorrupted code. The answer lies within. Mara's breath hitched. Declan's voice echoed in her mind. We've failed. Over and over again. Not this time, she thought. Not again. She stood, determined. The loop was unraveling, and so was she. But she'd find a way to break free, even if it killed her. Chapter 2. The reset 10 p.m. Mara's scream caught in her throat as she bolted upright in bed. Sweat plastered her hair to her face, and her breathing came fast and shallow. The clock on the wall flashed again, 2 p.m. The moment she opened her eyes, she knew it was wrong. The air in her apartment was different, stifling, heavy with tension. The fractures outside had worsened, light pouring through invisible seams in the sky, bending and refracting into shapes that shouldn't exist. She grabbed the chronoband from her bedside table and slid it onto her wrist, the holographic display flickering weakly. Declan's blood-stained face flashed in her mind, his desperate final act. Yet here she was again, thrown back to the beginning like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Her fingers danced across the chronoband's cracked surface. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The corrupted code still scrolled endlessly, but one fragment stood out, glowing brighter than the rest. The answer lies within. Within what? She muttered under her breath, her voice hoarse. What the hell does that mean? 12 p.m. Mara scanned her apartment, searching for anything out of place. Every detail felt maddeningly familiar. The cracked coffee mug on the counter, the overturned chair by the dining table, the faint scent of burnt toast lingering in the air. Yet something gnawed at her, an intangible wrongness she couldn't put her finger on. The walls trembled faintly, a low vibration humming through the apartment. She pressed her hand against the plaster, and for a moment, it felt like her palm was sinking into the surface. The material soft and pliable. She pulled back in alarm. The loop is destabilizing, she thought. Each reset seemed to fray the edges of reality further, like a thread unraveling from an old tapestry. If she didn't find a way out soon, there might not be anything left to escape to. Her eyes landed on the mirror by the front door. She moved toward it, her reflection shimmering like ripples on water. As she stared, something shifted. A flicker of movement behind her, a shadow darting across the room. She spun around, her pulse spiking. "Who's there?" she demanded. Silence. Her hand instinctively reached for the weapon holster that wasn't there. Damn it, she thought. The shadow could have been a trick of the light, or something worse. The pendulum's operatives had found her before. There was no reason to believe they wouldn't again. 2:25 p.m. by now, Mara had memorized the timing of every reset. She had less than 35 minutes before the loop pulled her back to the beginning, erasing everything she'd learned. She traced the corrupted coordinates on her chronoband to an abandoned building in the industrial district. Every instinct told her this was the key, the place where the chronocore had been activated, where this nightmare had begun. Grabbing her leather jacket, she stepped out into the surreal chaos of the streets. Cars hovered inches above the asphalt, frozen mid-motion, their tires spinning uselessly. Pedestrians blurred in and out of focus, their faces indistinct, as if reality couldn't decide whether they should exist. Mara weaved through the stalled vehicles, her boots crunching against broken glass. She didn't bother looking at the sky. The jagged rifts overhead had only grown wider, spilling light that burned her eyes if she stared too long. The world was breaking down piece by piece, and it was all happening on her watch. 2:43 p.m., the building loomed ahead, a crumbling monolith of steel and glass. Its windows flickered, reflecting impossible images. alternate versions of the city, glimpses of timelines that shouldn't exist. Mara felt a sharp pang in her chest as she saw a distorted reflection of herself, holding hands with someone she didn't recognize, laughing. The image vanished before she could make sense of it. Focus, she told herself, forcing her legs to move. The entrance was sealed, but the cracks in the walls betrayed the building's instability. With a sharp kick, she dislodged a section of concrete, creating an opening just wide enough to slip through. Inside, the air was thick, buzzing with static energy. The hum she'd felt in her apartment was deafening here, pulsing like a heartbeat. The walls shimmered, their surfaces shifting as though the building couldn't decide what time it belonged to. Her chrono band vibrated violently, the corrupted code spilling out faster now, scrolling across the display in chaotic bursts. She pressed a button, attempting to stabilize it, but the device only grew hotter against her wrist. "The answer lies within," the phrase repeated over and over, mocking her. 2:52 p.m. Mara reached the center of the building, her breath catching at the sight before her. The chronocore. It wasn't as she remembered, no longer a pulsing sphere of fractured light. Now it was a jagged, crystalline structure, its sharp edges radiating temporal energy that distorted the air around it. She stepped closer, every fiber of her being screaming at her to stop. The chronoband on her wrist began to emit a high-pitched whine, syncing with the core's frequency. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she wasn't in the building anymore. She was back at ChronoGuard HQ, staring down at her own body, lying motionless on an operating table. Voices echoed around her. "She won't survive another reset," a man said. "Her neural pathways are breaking down." "She has to," another voice replied, softer, but no less urgent. "She's the only one who can stop this." The scene vanished, and she was back in the building, gasping for air. Her knees buckled, and she clutched at the nearest wall for support. 2:59 p.m. Mara reached for the chronocore, her fingers brushing its jagged surface. Pain shot through her hand, but she didn't pull away. The device seemed to pulse in response, a wave of energy surging through her body. The whine of her chronoband grew deafening. The walls around her began to collapse, fragments of time bleeding through the cracks. She glimpsed flashes of other lives, hers, Declan's, even Elliot Drey's, all overlapping, colliding, unraveling. She screamed as the energy reached its peak, light exploding outward in a blinding flash. 2:12 p.m. She woke with a gasp, the sound of shattering glass echoing around her. The clock flashed 2 p.m. "No," she whispered, clutching her head. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. Her chronoband buzzed weakly, the words, "The answer lies within," still glowing on its fractured screen. Her fists clenched. This wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 3, Deja Vu 2 p.m. The glass shattered again. Mara bolted upright, her heart hammering in her chest. This time she didn't scream. She sat perfectly still, waiting for the fragmented memories to settle. The faint hum of the fractured timeline buzzed at the edge of her senses, like static in a broken radio. She turned to the clock on the wall, 2 p.m. The weight of it hit her. She was trapped, again. The sinking realization felt heavier this time, like chains tightening around her chest. Mara clenched her fists. "No," she muttered. "This time will be different." 03 p. The first thing she did was throw the mug off the counter. The shattered ceramic scattered across the floor. A small, symbolic rebellion against the loop, but it made her feel in control, if only for a moment. Her chronoband flickered as she pressed the interface. The corrupted code was still there, but she scanned it for any discernible patterns. A new phrase flashed briefly before disappearing. "Actions ripple." She frowned. Actions ripple? What did that mean? Did it mean the loop wasn't as rigid as it seemed? If so, what could she change? What should she change? The apartment door knocked, breaking her focus. 2:12 p.m. Declan was there again, leaning against the doorframe like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. His face carried the same haunted exhaustion she'd seen before. "You know me now?" he asked, his tone weary. "I know enough," she replied, brushing past him into the hallway. "We're stuck. That's all I need to know." His eyebrows raised, but he followed. "You're starting to catch on faster." "Save the commentary," she snapped. "If I'm going to be stuck in this nightmare, I'm not going to waste time listening to you repeat yourself." Declan stopped in his tracks, his hand resting against the wall. "Do you think this is your first loop?" Mara froze. "What? You think you just woke up in this hell for the first time?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You've been here before. We both have. You just don't remember." Chapter 22, p.m. The city churned with chaos. Mara wove through the frozen cars, dodging pedestrians trapped mid-step, their bodies flickering in and out like bad holograms. Declan trailed behind her, mumbling warnings she didn't care to hear. "What are you planning to do, exactly?" he asked, jogging to catch up. "Change something," she said. "Anything. If I can disrupt the loop, find the ripple, it might trigger a way out." Declan sighed. "You think I haven't tried that? I've saved people, sabotaged pendulum installations, even destroyed the damn chrono core, and here we are." Mara stopped and turned to face him. "Then you've been doing it wrong." Declan chuckled bitterly. "And you're so sure you'll succeed?" "I have to," she said. "Because if I don't, no one will." 32. p.m. At the corner of 8th and Vesner, she spotted something new. A vendor's cart overturned on the sidewalk. A few oranges rolled lazily toward the gutter. It wasn't there in the last loop. Her pulse quickened. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing to the cart. Declan shook his head. "You're grasping at straws." "No," she said, stepping closer. "It's different. It wasn't here before." The vendor was frozen, his arms stretched out toward a spilled crate. As she moved to inspect it, a familiar hum resonated through the air. Low, ominous. Mara glanced up and saw them. Pendulum operatives. They emerged from the shadows like wraiths, their movements fluid yet fragmented, as though time itself bent around them. Their uniforms, sleek, black, and reflective, made them look like living shards of a broken mirror. "Run!" Declan hissed. 2:39 p.m. They ducked into an alley, Mara's breath coming in ragged gasps. Declan pressed her against the wall, his hand clamping over her mouth as footsteps echoed nearby. The operatives moved like predators, their footsteps unnervingly silent, despite the chaos around them. Mara's mind raced. In every previous loop, the pendulum operatives had found her closer to the chronocore. But now they were here, hunting her earlier than before. Was it because she had changed her actions? Did the ripple she caused draw their attention? The vendor's cart. That had to be it. Somehow, moving toward it had altered the timeline, even slightly. She bit down on Declan's hand, forcing him to release her. "Hey," he whispered harshly. "If they're here now, it means I'm doing something right," she said, peeking around the corner. "That's insane." "No," she replied, her voice firm. "It's progress." 47 p.m. The operatives had fallen back, their hunt temporarily stalled. Mara and Declan slipped into a decrepit subway station, its flickering lights casting jagged shadows across the walls. The hum of the chronocore vibrated through the floor, growing stronger as they descended. "We're not going to make it," Declan said, collapsing onto a bench. "Even if we reach the core, the reset will pull us back before we can do anything." Mara ignored him, scanning the chronoband. She pressed against the corrupted code, forcing the device to display data it clearly wasn't built to handle. For a brief moment, a map of the city flashed on the screen. "There," she said, pointing at a blinking red dot. "That's the source of the loop." Declan leaned over her shoulder. "You think we can get there in 13 minutes? We don't have a choice." P58. They reached the building as the world began to collapse. The fractures in the sky widened, spilling liquid light onto the streets below. Cars floated into the air, their metallic frames bending and twisting like paper. The chronocore pulsed violently, the energy waves emanating from its jagged surface sending tremors through the ground. Mara stumbled but kept moving, her eyes locked on the glowing structure at the center of the chaos. "This time," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "This time I'll make it." She reached for the chronocore, her hand outstretched. The world exploded in a blinding flash of light. 2 p.m. glass shattered. Mara woke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. The clock on the wall read 2 p.m. Her chronoband vibrated weakly, a single message glowing on its screen. "Ripples grow, keep pushing." Mara sat up, her jaw set. Each reset brought her closer, even if she couldn't see it yet. "I'll break you," she whispered to the loop. "Even if it kills me."